You're too predictable, she laughed softly. I agreed, rewrote my 5-year plan, accepted the overseas promotion, and closed the joint accounts with precision. When stability suddenly looked attractive again, predictable was no longer available for reconsideration under any circumstances. You're too predictable, she laughed softly. Not mean about it. Not even trying to wound. Just a quiet little observation, tossed out the way you'd comment on the weather. Casual, offhand, barely worth the breath it took. She said it while we were sitting at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening. I had cooked pasta. I had cooked pasta every Tuesday for the better part of a year. Garlic butter, a little Parmesan, whatever vegetable was about to turn in the fridge. Always some variation of the same dish. Always the same 2 ceramic bowls. Always the same small wooden board where I rested the serving spoon. She was twirling her fork when she said it, smiling to herself, like the thought had just occurred to her and amused her more than it bothered her. Like it was a gentle joke, and she expected me to laugh along. I looked up from my bowl. I didn't say anything right away. I just let the words sit there on the table between us, next to the Parmesan and the bread I had sliced at a perfectly even, completely predictable angle. And then I said, yeah, because she wasn't wrong. I was predictable. I woke up at 5:50 every morning without an alarm. I took the same route to the office, east on Carver, left on the main boulevard, through the underpass, up the elevator to the 14th floor. I made the same food on the same days. I planned things weeks in advance, sometimes months. I had a spreadsheet, an actual color-coded spreadsheet, that mapped out my financial goals for the next 60 months, with quarterly checkpoints and projected adjustments built in. I had a 5-year plan. I was, in every measurable way, exactly the kind of person that a certain type of person would find boring, and I had always been okay with that. Because predictability, to me, wasn't a flaw. It was the thing I had built deliberately. After years of watching chaos, in my parents' home, in my own early 20s, in the quiet financial disasters that came from making decisions with your heart instead of your head, predictability was the structure I had chosen. Not the cage, the foundation. But she laughed softly, and something inside me filed that laugh away. Not consciously, not with any plan attached to it yet. Just quietly noted it and kept it somewhere safe. Because when someone laughs at the thing you built your life around, you don't always respond in the moment. Sometimes you just wait. Sometimes you watch. And sometimes, when the picture becomes fully clear, you act. And you act with a precision that no one who called you boring ever thought to anticipate. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. We had been together for 3 years. Her name was Claire. We had moved in together 18 months prior, into a 2-bedroom in the kind of neighborhood that was just starting to get good coffee shops and weekend farmers markets. We had a joint account. We had a shared lease. We had made vague, comfortable promises about the future, the kind of promises people make when everything feels settled and no one is asking the hard questions yet. She worked in marketing at a mid-sized creative firm downtown. She was vibrant, restless, socially magnetic, the kind of person who could walk into any room and immediately recalibrate its energy. I worked in corporate finance at a firm whose name you would recognize, but whose hallways you would find aggressively beige. I was 31. She was 29. And up until that Tuesday evening with the pasta and the Parmesan and the soft laugh, I would have said we were fine. Not electric. Not the kind of couple that strangers stared at, but fine in the way that actually matters. Consistent, honest, building towards something real. At least, that was my version of the story. I was about to find out that she had been writing a slightly different one for quite some time. The Tuesday laugh didn't turn into anything that night. She moved on, asked about my day, told me about a campaign pitch she had crushed at work. I listened. We cleaned up together. We watched something forgettable on television. We went to bed. Normal. Predictable, even. But something had shifted, and I didn't understand the full weight of it until the small moments started stacking up. A week later, she came home 40 minutes late from a gym session she had never mentioned scheduling. I didn't say anything. It was just 40 minutes. But I noticed. The week after that, she mentioned a new friend she had made, a guy named Derek who apparently did something with startups and had a habit of convincing people to go to rooftop bars on weeknights. She said his name the way people say a name when they've been holding on to it for a few days and have finally found an excuse to let it out. Casually, but with just a little too much ease. I said, that sounds fun. Because it did, probably. And because I trusted her. Or at least, I was still in the part of the story where trusting her felt like the correct and reasonable default. The next Friday, she told me she was going out with some people from a creative networking group she had just joined. I was in the middle of reconciling a quarterly report. I said, "Have fun." She did. She came home past 1 in the morning. I was already in bed, or almost asleep, the particular kind of not quite sleep that arrives when a part of you is keeping watch without the rest of you agreeing to do it consciously. I heard the key in the lock. I heard her moving through the apartment with the careful quietness of someone who knows someone else is sleeping and is trying very hard not to disturb them. I lay still. She got into bed. She didn't say goodnight. I didn't say goodnight. We both pretended the other was already gone. In the morning, we had coffee and talked about the weather. I noted the morning's entry in the mental file I had not yet named. The second time she called me predictable, it was not as soft. We were in a discussion, not quite an argument, not yet, about weekend plans. She wanted to drive 3 hours to some pop-up market in the middle of nowhere that a friend had posted about on social media. I pointed out that we had agreed the weekend before to finally deal with the water pressure issue in the second bathroom and do a proper grocery restock that had been delayed twice already. Practical things. Unglamorous, but things that needed doing. She said, "You know what, never mind. I already knew you'd say that." And there it was again. Not laughing this time, just tired. The way people sound when they've internally already reached a conclusion and are simply waiting for the world to catch up. "You always do this," she said, though her voice had leveled off by then. "You schedule everything so tightly that there's never any room left for something unplanned." I said, "Unplanned doesn't fix the water pressure." She looked at me, a long, measuring kind of look. "No," she said quietly, "it doesn't." And then she went to the bedroom and closed the door. Not a slam, not dramatic, just the door closing in the way that signals something is done being discussed. I stood in the kitchen for a while. I thought about the water pressure. I thought about the pop-up market and what she would have done there. Walked through stalls, tried food samples, taken pictures, felt alive in the uncomplicated way that unplanned afternoons sometimes allow. I thought about Derek, who did something with startups and went to rooftop bars on weeknights and presumably had never once color-coded a spreadsheet. And I thought, she is circling something. She has been circling it for a while now. And whatever it is, she is not ready to land on it directly yet. But she will. The month after that argument about the weekend plans, the changes accelerated in the way that changes do when someone has privately made up their mind but hasn't yet found the courage to say it. She started going to the gym 4 evenings a week instead of 2. She started buying different clothes, not dramatically different, just slightly outside the range of what she had always worn. Brighter, more interesting, the kind of thing someone wears when they are performing a version of themselves that they want a particular audience to notice. She started looking at her phone more and looking at me less. Not obviously, not in a way that would have given me clean grounds for confrontation. Just the slow drift that happens when someone's attention has found a new center of gravity and their body is the last thing to catch up to where their mind has already gone. We still had dinners. We still talked. But the conversations had changed shape. They had become careful. The way conversations become when two people have already decided not to say the real thing and are filling the silence with everything else just to keep it from getting too loud. I noticed all of it. I cataloged all of it. I said nothing, because I have learned, at real cost, that the most important thing you can do when a situation is changing is to observe it clearly before you respond to it. Responding to the first signal is usually a mistake. Responding after the full picture has assembled itself is almost always correct. I was waiting for the full picture. Just matter of fact, like a diagnosis that she had been sitting on for a while and was finally comfortable enough to say out loud in a place with ambient lighting. I paid the check. We drove home. She thanked me. And I spent the whole drive wondering whether the woman beside me was the person I had decided she was, or whether I had been filling in blanks with my own assumptions about who she had to be, because it was more convenient than reading what was actually on the page. My colleague Owen had known me for 6 years. We came up through the same graduate program, competed briefly at rival firms, and ended up together at the same company when a merger reshuffled the deck 3 years back. He was the kind of person who didn't tell you what you wanted to hear. Not because he enjoyed being blunt, just because he had watched too many people wreck their lives on the back of comfortable lies and had made a personal commitment to not contributing to that particular cycle. About 6 weeks after the restaurant dinner, I told him what was happening. Not all of it, just enough. The comments about predictability, the late nights, The Derek situation I had not yet confronted directly. The way the apartment had started to feel like two separate people sharing a floor plan without sharing anything else. Owen listened without interrupting. Then he said, "Has she actually done anything?" I said, "No." "Hey," she said. "I didn't hear you come in." "Meeting got canceled," I said. "Oh." She opened the fridge. Closed it. "Good day otherwise?" "Who was that?" I said. Flat. No drama in the tone. Just the question, placed on the counter like an item being returned. She didn't pretend she hadn't heard it. That was one thing about Claire. She didn't play dumb when she had been caught. She closed the fridge. She turned around. "Derek," she said. I nodded slowly. "The startup guy?" "Yes." I looked at my glass. "Is there something I should know about Derek?" She was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that has considerable activity inside it. Then, "Nothing has happened." "Okay," I said. "But," she said. I waited. She crossed her arms. Not defensive. More like holding herself together while she assembled the right words. "I don't know how to say this without it sounding like something it's not." "Try," I said. A long pause. "I feel like I've been disappearing," she said. "Into this apartment. Into this routine. Into the version of things where everything is planned out and there's never any space for just not knowing what comes next. For something to surprise you." I said, "And Derek surprises you." She didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. "And I don't," I said. Not with bitterness. Just completing the sentence she hadn't finished. She looked at the floor. "I'm not saying you're a bad person," she said. "I know you're not," I said. "I'm just saying that lately I feel like I already know exactly how everything is going to go. And that makes me feel bored," I said. She flinched slightly. "Restless," she corrected. "Okay," I said. I set my glass down. I looked at her for a long moment. Not with anger. Not with the kind of crumbling hurt she seemed to be bracing for. Just looked at her. The way you look at a balance sheet that hasn't reconciled after 3 attempts. When you finally decide to start over from the beginning instead of looking for a simple rounding error. "Thank you for telling me the truth," I said. She looked surprised. "That's all you're going to say?" "For tonight, yes," I said. I picked up my glass. I walked to my home office. I closed the door. Not in anger. Not with drama. Just a door closing in the way that means a chapter is over. The days that followed that Thursday were strange in the specific way that only limbo can be strange. We were still in the same apartment. Still sleeping in the same bed, with the kind of careful distance between two people that is somehow louder than if they had simply moved to separate rooms. We were still saying good morning. Still making coffee in the same kitchen. Still navigating the same floor plan that now felt like a stage set for a play that had already closed but hadn't yet finished taking down the scenery. She didn't mention Derek again. I didn't ask. We were both, in our separate ways, waiting for the other person to be the one who said the thing that couldn't be taken back. I had no intention of being the one to flinch first. Not because of pride, but because I already knew what I was going to do. I just needed the right moment to say it plainly. That I had not told Claire. Not that night, not before it. 3 weeks before that Thursday, I had received an email from the director of our Southeast Asia Expansion Division. His name was Hargrove. He had been watching my output for 18 months. The firm was opening a regional headquarters in Singapore. They needed a senior finance operations lead, a position that would have taken me 4 or 5 years of domestic progression to reach through the normal path. The package was extraordinary. Relocation covered. Housing allowance. A salary number that I read 3 times to make sure I wasn't misreading a decimal point. Start date, 90 days out. The night I received that email, I read it carefully, saved it to a folder labeled pending, and told myself I would make a decision when things at home were clearer. I had not mentioned it to Claire, not because I was hiding it, but because I knew, and I think I had known from the Tuesday pasta laugh onward, in that part of myself where things are understood before they are stated, that the Singapore decision and the relationship decision were going to turn out to be the same decision. They were always going to land in the same place. I just needed enough information to be certain. By that Thursday evening, I had it. That weekend, Claire told me she was going to stay at her friend Natalie's for a couple of days. She needed space to think, she said. I said that was fine. She packed a bag. I watched her move through the apartment, their apartment, our apartment, the apartment, and noticed how easily she moved without looking at me. The door closed behind her. I sat at my desk Saturday morning with 2 browser tabs open. The Hargrove email in one, the joint account in the other. I had been watching that account for 2 months. Not obsessively, just the way I watch all numbers. In the beginning, we had agreed to a clean household budget, rent, groceries, utilities, shared subscriptions. My contribution hit on the first of every month. What I had noticed, in my careful and boring and meticulous way, was that the expenses coming out of that account did not always align with the agreed-upon categories. 3-bar charges on weeknight Thursdays. A dinner for 2 at a restaurant neither of us had ever mentioned. A hotel charge from a weekend I had understood Claire to be visiting Natalie. Not enormous amounts individually, but consistent, and consistently unexplained. I had not raised any of it. I had just watched, and waited for the picture to resolve. Saturday morning, it was resolved. I sat back in my chair and looked at the total for a long moment. Not with anger. Anger is imprecise, and imprecision is something I don't afford myself when a situation calls for clarity. What I felt was closer to recognition. The kind that arrives when a suspicion you've been quietly carrying for weeks turns out to be correct, and you are not surprised, just confirmed. The account discrepancies were not the point. They were evidence. Evidence that the story she had been telling me and the story she had been living were not the same document. And that gap, between the story told and the story lived, was the actual, fundamental issue. Everything else was just line items. I noted the total. I prepared my documentation with the same care I would give any audit. I closed that tab, and I opened the Hargrove email. I called Hargrove. He picked up on the second ring. I said I was calling about Singapore. He said, I was beginning to wonder if you'd gone quiet on us. I said, I needed to get a few things sorted on my end. He said, and are they sorted? I said yes. We spoke for 40 minutes. By the end, the offer was formalized, the start date confirmed, and the contract queued for Monday morning delivery. I hung up. I opened the joint account. I began the process of separating my finances with the same deliberate precision I bring to every other thing in my life. Not rushed, not emotional, step by step. The way you methodically close a position when you have decided the risk no longer justifies the exposure. When Claire came back Sunday evening, I was in the kitchen, not making pasta. I had made a slow roast that had been in the oven for 3 hours and required precise temperature management and timed basting intervals. Spontaneous, in the most deliberate way possible. She walked in, smelled the food, and for a moment her face did the real, unguarded thing. That smells incredible, she said. Sit down, I said. It's almost ready. We ate, and I told her about Singapore. All of it, the email from 3 weeks back, the conversation with Hargrove, the role, the package, the timeline. She put her fork down mid-sentence. She stared at me. 3 weeks, she said. You knew for 3 weeks. Yes. And you didn't say anything. I was deciding, I said. And now? I've accepted the position, I said. I leave in 87 days. The kitchen was very quiet. She looked at me the way I had looked at her that Thursday evening in the entryway, like she was trying to locate herself on a map that had been redrawn without her knowledge. What does that mean for us? She said. I had rehearsed nothing. I had planned no specific words for this moment. But I had thought about it for a long time, in the way that I think about everything, slowly and thoroughly, and without rushing toward a conclusion before the evidence is complete. I said, I think it means we have to be honest about what we actually have. She said, I don't want to lose you. I said, you told me I was too predictable. She said, that's not. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I believe you, I said. I don't think you were being deliberately unkind. I think you were telling the truth. And the truth is that what you need from a relationship and what I am don't actually match. She said, people change. I could. Claire, I said. She stopped. I'm not angry, I said. I want you to hear that. I'm not punishing you. I'm reading the situation the way it actually is, not the way I'd prefer it to be. And the way it actually is finished. She looked at the table for a long moment. I thought she was going to cry. She didn't. Is there anything I can say? She asked. I considered it genuinely. No, I said. And I don't say that to close a door on you. I say it because I think we've both known for a long time how this was going. And the kindest thing I can do now is not make you spend more time pretending otherwise. She left the table. She went to the bedroom. She closed the door quietly. Not a slam. Not dramatic. Just a door closing in the way that means the last honest thing has been said, and there is nothing left to add. I sat at the kitchen table alone for a while, and I felt, underneath the weight of it, the first clean breath of air I had taken in longer than I wanted to admit. The next 60 days were the most organized of my life. I know that sounds like an odd thing to say about the period of time in which a relationship ended and an entire life got disassembled and reconstructed on a different continent. but grief and efficiency have never been mutually exclusive for me. I gave notice on my portion of the apartment lease. I arranged for a subletter through the building management. I gave Claire first right to take over the unit entirely, since she was the one who had always loved the neighborhood, the coffee shops, the weekend market, the way the afternoon light hit the living room window in the early evenings of autumn. She took it. I didn't make it complicated. I didn't make it painful. I just made it clean. I closed my contributions to the joint account the morning after our Sunday dinner. I moved my portion of the shared savings to a personal account. I returned to the joint account one final time to calculate the unexplained charges I had documented over the previous 2 months. I did not raise them in conversation. I simply calculated the precise total, transferred the exact amount back to myself, and noted the discrepancy in a document I kept but never sent to anyone. Because some things do not need to be said out loud. Some things just need to be correctly accounted for. I told Owen over coffee midway through the 60 days. He let me finish before he said anything. Then, how are you actually doing? I'm fine, I said. That's not what I asked. I put my cup down. I feel, I said, like I've been winding a clock in the wrong direction for a long time. And someone finally showed me which way it's supposed to turn. He looked at me for a moment. She doesn't understand what she handed back, he said. No, I said. She thinks she traded predictable for exciting. She doesn't understand that predictable was a choice. A deliberate one. And like all choices, it had a window attached to it. Owen said, that's a cold way to frame it. Maybe, I said. But it's accurate. And accurate matters more to me than comfortable. Now I want to tell you what I left out until this point. Because this story isn't really about one Tuesday evening and a soft laugh over pasta. It's about the 18 months before and after that moment. It's about the way she had once described me, and I remember this precisely, as the most genuinely steady person she had ever been with. She said it in the 3rd month of the relationship. We were sitting in the car after dinner and she had turned to look at me and said, without any particular setup, "You make me feel like the ground is solid." I've never had that before. I remember thinking that was the most real thing anyone had ever said to me. Not the most flattering, the most real, because it named the thing I had actually tried to build. Not a persona, not a performance, just a foundation. A place where someone could stand without checking whether the floor was going to give. She had wanted that, at first. The stillness. The competence. The man who moved through the world without needing it to applaud him. She called it calm. She called it grounded. She called it the most attractive thing she had encountered. And then, slowly, the same quality that she had called security began to look like rigidity. The same quality she had called calm began to look like indifference. The same quality she had called grounded became the word she finally settled on, predictable. I don't say that to condemn her. It is a genuinely human thing. We adapt to what we have. We stop seeing the foundation beneath our feet because we've been standing on it long enough that it just feels like the floor. She had stopped feeling the ground as something intentionally built. She had started feeling it as something boringly given. What she had not accounted for was that the ground had a builder. And the builder, when sufficiently informed, was entirely capable of breaking ground somewhere else. Somewhere that did not require him to defend the architecture of his own character to someone who had stopped being interested in it. I had never been to Singapore before I moved there. I had read extensively about it, naturally. Cost of living breakdowns, transit maps, neighborhood comparisons, humidity adjustment timelines. Predictable preparation. But the first time I walked through that city on my own terms, bags unpacked, lease signed, new office located on the map, I felt something I had not expected. Not relief. Not the dramatic exhale of a man finally free. Something quieter. Clarity. The kind of clarity that only arrives when you remove yourself from an environment that has been slowly thinning the air around you. Step into open space and breathe and realize, with some mild shock, how long it has been since you were able to do that without something constricting. The first week, I set up the apartment alone. No negotiation about where the couch went. No managing someone else's preferences about which cabinet was whose. No quiet tension over the fact that I had rearranged the kitchen in a more efficient configuration without announcing it first. I put things where they made sense. I organized them the way I organized everything, functionally, deliberately, in a sequence that matched the actual order in which I used them. Then I stepped back and looked at the apartment, and it looked exactly like what it was. A space built by a person who knew exactly what he needed and had given himself permission to build it that way. I made coffee. I sat at the window. I watched Singapore in the early morning. The particular quality of light that city has before the heat sets in, the efficiency of its streets, the way the whole place seems to operate according to some quietly excellent internal logic. And I thought, I understand this city. I thought, I have always understood this kind of city. And I built my routine. Same wake-up time. Same deliberate morning commute. Same planning system. Same color-coded spreadsheet, updated now for a different city and a different chapter. Predictable. Thoroughly, completely, productively predictable. And for the first time in 3 years, no one laughed at it. No one rolled their eyes at the meal planning. No one made the face when I declined a spontaneous Thursday rooftop bar invitation because I had an early morning report to finish. The routine was mine. The life inside it was mine. And it turned out that when no one is quietly auditing your character, you can actually breathe inside your own structure. It was 4 months into the Singapore posting when the first message came. I was at my desk at 7:15 in the morning. My personal phone buzzed. Claire, hey, I know this is out of nowhere. I hope you're settling in. I've been thinking a lot about us, about how things went. I think I made some mistakes and I didn't handle things well. Would you be open to talking sometime? I read it. Then I read it again. I turned the phone face down on the desk. I finished the report I was working on. An hour later, I picked the phone back up, looked at the message one more time, then put it down again. Not cruelty, not performance. Just, I had already had every version of that conversation, internally, across the 60 days between the Sunday dinner and the departure gate. I had reached a conclusion that did not require her input to become final. 3 days later, a second message. I missed the stability. I think I didn't understand what I had until it wasn't there. Derek and I didn't work out. I'm not telling you that because I think it changes anything. I just wanted to be honest with you. I sat with that one for a while. I did appreciate the honesty. Sincerely. But appreciation and reconsideration are not the same currency. You cannot spend honesty to buy back a window that is already closed. She had been honest with me at the kitchen table months ago, and I had received that honesty correctly, by taking it seriously, by acting on it, by not pretending it meant something other than what it clearly meant. Her honesty then had set things in motion. Her honesty now was arriving at a station the train had already left. I typed a reply, deleted it, typed it again, deleted that too. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because there were too many true things to say, and none of them were kind. And I had made a commitment to myself long before Singapore that I would not spend words on cruelty when silence was available. I could have written, I know about the hotel charge. I could have written, I heard the video call. I could have written, I sat at the kitchen table the Tuesday after you laughed at the pasta, and I looked at the person I had spent 3 years building a life with and quietly began to understand that the life I was building and the life she wanted were never going to be the same structure. I could have written all of that. Instead, I wrote 6 words. I hope you find what you need. And then I turned my phone over, finished my coffee, and walked back into the office, where 43 people were depending on a finance operations lead who showed up precisely on time, executed without drama, and did not require the room's approval to do his job well. Owen visited me in Singapore about 5 months into the posting. A conference nearby, layover extended by a few days. We walked through the city on a Saturday afternoon. I showed him the coffee shop I went to every morning, the route I took to the office, the park where I read on Saturday afternoons when the weather allowed. He didn't say much while I walked him through it. Then he said, "You look different." "Same schedule," I said. "Different hemisphere." He laughed. "Not what I mean. You look lighter. Like you've stopped carrying something you didn't even know you were carrying." I thought about that for a moment while we walked. For 3 years, I said, I was quietly defending my own character to someone who had stopped being curious about it. I didn't know that was what I was doing while I was doing it. But looking back, every time I came home and made dinner, there was a part of me that was braced for the subtle commentary, the small deflation, the look that said you are exactly what I expected, and that's somehow the problem. Owen nodded. He didn't say anything. Just let me finish. "You don't notice how much energy that takes," I said. "Bracing. Consistently. For a long time. Until you stop. And then you realize you've been tensing a muscle for so long that you forgot what it felt like to have it at rest." "And now it's at rest," he said. "Now it's at rest," I said. We walked another block before either of us spoke again. "Do you regret any of it?" he said. I considered it genuinely, the way I try to consider everything. "No," I said. "I regret none of the 3 years. I think I was exactly what I was supposed to be in that relationship. I was honest. I was present. I showed up. I just eventually had to accept that showing up correctly for someone who doesn't value what you're showing up with is not a failure of character. It's a mismatch of priorities. That's a very clean way to process heartbreak, Owen said. I had 60 days and a 14-hour flight, I said. He laughed again. I don't have to convince anyone that I'm worth what I am, I said. I think that's probably it. Owen nodded slowly. She reached out. A few months ago, both messages. And I wished her well. I meant it too. He was quiet for a moment. Then, most people would have gone back. She offered you a return route. Most people take it. Most people, I said, were not systematically called boring for 2 years while someone quietly used a joint account to fund their Thursday evenings. Owen stopped walking. He turned to look at me. Wait, the account. Don't make it into a scene, I said. It's already been accounted for. Literally. He stared at me for a second. Then he laughed. A real one, the deep kind. You transferred the exact amount back, he said. Down to the decimal point. Of course you did. It was the correct thing to do, I said. He shook his head, still smiling. She had no idea what she was dealing with. She thought she was dealing with someone boring, I said. And boring people, I said, don't accept overseas promotions, recalculate 5-year plans, and close joint accounts with surgical precision. Boring people sit still. I was never boring. I was just patient. Owen looked at me for a long moment. Then he picked up his coffee. I'm glad you came here, he said. So am I said. We kept walking. There is something I want to say before I end this. Not a lesson wrapped in a bow. Not a moral handed to you at the door on your way out. Just something true that I think is worth naming plainly. Predictability is not the enemy of passion. It is not the opposite of depth. It is not the absence of a soul. Predictability is what happens when a person has learned, often through genuine difficulty, to take their own words seriously. When a man says he will be there at 7, and he is there at 7, that is not a failure of imagination. That is a person who has decided that his commitments mean something. When someone has a 5-year plan, that is not the absence of dreams. That is someone who respects the actual distance between where they are and where they are going enough to measure it honestly. I was predictable. I remain predictable. I wake up at the same time. I plan my finances. I take the same route to work when the same route is the best route. I have a new 5-year plan. It is color-coded. It has quarterly checkpoints. It does not include a joint account with someone who laughed softly at the most honest thing about me. Somewhere in an apartment that used to have afternoon light I loved, and a water pressure problem I fixed, and a kitchen where I made pasta on Tuesdays. Somewhere in that apartment, I hope Claire found what she was looking for. The chaos, the spontaneity, the feeling of not knowing what comes next. I genuinely hope it gave her everything she believed it would. But here is the thing about windows. They exist for a reason. They are not permanent. And when someone shows you, through 100 small signals and one very clear video call conversation that you were not supposed to hear, that they have already decided, you can either pretend you didn't receive the information, or you can act on it correctly. I acted on it correctly. That second message, the one about stability, about realizing what she had, about Derek not working out, I read it, and I felt nothing that resembled a door reopening. Not because I had become cold, not because the years meant nothing, but because I had understood something by then that I had only half understood before. Predictability is a feature, not a flaw. It is the feature that makes a person show up. The feature that means the plan gets executed and the crisis gets handled and the foundation holds when other things don't. And that feature was mine to offer freely and mine to withdraw permanently. I had offered it. She had laughed at it. I had agreed with her. And then I had done the most predictable thing possible. I had taken the facts as they were presented. I had responded accordingly. 87 days from that Sunday dinner. Not one more. Not one fewer. Because people who build foundations do not dismantle them for drama. They dismantle them when the person standing on the foundation has already turned toward the door. When the person who once said the ground feels solid beneath her feet has spent 6 months looking for a different floor to stand on. And then they rebuild, somewhere better, with cleaner air and a wider view and no requirement to justify the architecture to anyone. Without apology, without theater, without the need for anyone's understanding or permission. Quietly, precisely, on schedule. The 5-year plan is on its 3rd revision now. The first version was the one I had before that Tuesday evening. The settled, shared lease version with joint goals and a vague understanding that the apartment would eventually become something more permanent. The second version was the one I rewrote the Saturday morning that Claire was at Natalie's. the one where Singapore moved from a footnote to the main event. The third version is what I am executing now. It doesn't have a partner built into it yet. It has a city I am learning to navigate and to love. It has a role I am genuinely excellent at, in an office where the people around me understand that efficiency is not the same as coldness. It has a savings rate that would make a financial planner put down their coffee and look up with something approaching reverence. It has a park bench, a Saturday afternoon, a book, and a particular quality of light that comes through subtropical air in the late hours of the afternoon. It has the specific kind of peace that arrives for people who stop explaining themselves to rooms where no one is genuinely listening. I want to say one more thing. Not for her. Not as a message directed at anyone who might be reading this looking for confirmation of something they already feel. Just as an honest statement of something I believe. There is a particular kind of cruelty in calling someone's integrity boring. In taking the thing a person built with genuine effort, the discipline, the steadiness, the refusal to be reckless with other people's trust, and labeling it a personality defect. Not because the person calling it boring is evil, but because they have confused stability for limitation. They have confused the absence of chaos for the absence of depth. They have mistaken a foundation for a ceiling. And by the time they understand the difference, the person they confused has usually already moved. Not in anger, in clarity, with their bag packed precisely, with their finances closed correctly, with their 5-year plan updated and their departure gate confirmed. On schedule, as always. Predictable? Yes. Completely. Unapologetically. Without exception. And no longer available for reconsideration. Under any circumstances. For anyone.